Lamia, Alex, Alvin, Amelia, Anikele, Anirudh, Anjali, present one. Okay, I'm marking you, Abhinav. Anjali is here. And Annette, present one. Angelina, present one. Anugraha, present one. Arish, present one. Arsha, present one. Aryan Chauhan, Aryan Malhotra, Aryansh, present one. Bharti, present one. Christina, present one. Denoto, Dev, Divyansh, Dikshita, Elva, Eva, Gloria, Hardik, Harsh, Himakshi, Himangi, Himani, Hobson, Ivania, Joanne, Kabir, Kasa, Kashish, Khushbu, Kushagra, Kutsia Pro, Lalit, Laltrusa, Lavanya, Nun, Mansi, Manna, Maria, Tasneem, Muskan, Naman, Nimit, Noel, Farah, Prarthi, Pratyusha, Priyanshu, Rahul, Veet, Rekha, Sedit, Samar, Sara, Sherika, Sham, Shifa, Shivam, Srishti, Shubham, Sophia, Sparsh, Kanish, Wednesday, Teja, Tia, Tuan, Vartika, Vidit Jain, Vidit Srivastava, Wansuo, Yashwanthan. So I'm moving on to social and economic developments, and I'll start with a general discussion of Varna, Jati, kinship and marriage. I'm drawing mostly on Uma Chakravarti's work on caste and gender. So this is, as a framework, summary of what Uma Chakravarti says in a whole range of her work, including a slim little volume titled Gendering Caste Through a Feminist Lens. So you probably know most of this anyway, but I'm just going to try and pull it together in the class today. I hope I'll finish today and then I can move on to untouchability, which of course is a term that's taken from the Sanskrit text. So the term asprishya appears in the Sanskrit text from the Vishnu Smriti, and not that you don't have groups that are considered polluting or degraded or low down in the social hierarchy before that. And this part of the Vishnu Smriti perhaps dates to about the 3rd century CE, so it's quite late, 3rd, 4th century CE. But the term asprishya is used for the first time in the Vishnu Smriti, and the word untouchable is English translation of that term. So, I mean, I will put it in single inverted commas each time, but that just takes too much time. So keep that in mind. This is coming from the Sanskrit word asprishya, and in Hindi this is achhu, chhu nahi sakte. Right? So that's where please keep your phones off, whoever's that is. So let's begin with a general discussion of class, caste and gender. In general, two forms of inequality are recognized in studying the Indian past and present. These are class and caste. Class divides people on the basis of control over resources, and caste divides people on the basis of social structure. To these two, we need to add gender, and the manner in which these three aspects of inequality are linked to each other. You know already from the hundreds of times that I've said this, that the Varna Jati system does not exist from time immemorial. It didn't come into existence when the earth as we know it came into existence, even if that is what the Purusha Sukta tells us. We need to remember that there was a long, slow process during which the Varna Jati system evolved into the complex formation with which we are familiar today. And in early Buddhist texts, we can see the attempts of Brahmins to claim the highest position and best privileges for themselves based on purity of birth. And these claims are contested by the Buddha and his followers. So, of course, the crucial question is, when do these texts date to? Perhaps they're a bit later than we earlier thought they were, because the early chronology that you find also in Rupinder Singh's textbook, and that's what the syllabus works with, is 500 to 300 BC are the dates for the early parts of the Pali canon. At this time, the Varna Jati system as we know it has not really crystallized. While you find it mentioned in the Vedic texts, you find the four Varnas in the Vedic texts. It's hard to date Dharma Shastra material, and the epigraphic evidence does not suggest that this is a system that crystallizes till the post-Mauryan period, and a lot of the Buddhist texts are now dated to that time. But however one may date these texts, Uma Chakravarti draws our attention to a dialogue between the Buddha and a Brahman, and this appears in the Sutta Pitaka. So remember, the Pali canon has three Pitakas, Sutta, Vinaya and Abhidhamma. This appears in the Sutta Pitaka. The Brahman says only Brahmans form the best caste. The rest are all low. Only Brahmans are pure, not non-Brahmans. Only Brahmans are the sons of Brahma, born of his mouth. So here you have many important things that one can highlight. Brahmans are the best Varna, the Brahman himself is saying. So remember that a lot of our source material is composed, compiled, preserved, transmitted by Brahman men, and carries their self-perception and their understanding of everybody else. So Brahmans are the best Varna. Brahmans are pure. So an important aspect of the Varna Jati system is the idea of purity and pollution, right? So some groups are pure, others are impure. They are polluting groups. Only Brahmans are the sons of Brahma. So you have the creator mentioned in different ways. In the Purusha Sukta, the creator is Purusha, but the Brahman appears from his mouth. Here, the Brahman is appearing from the mouth of Brahma. The Buddha responds by saying, have you heard that in Cambodia and other areas, so these are areas in the northwest, there are only two Varnas, Aryas and Dasas. This is translated by Uma Chakravarti as masters and slaves. So the Sanskrit words, these are in Pali, would be Arya and Dasa. And that having been a master, one can become a slave. And having been a slave, one can become a master. So the Buddha's position is against birth-based claims of superior status. Wealth and standing can change over time, and masters can become slaves, slaves can become masters. From this and many other examples in the Buddhist texts, we can see that there was a contestation and a rejection of the claim of birth-based status that is now an aspect of the caste system. Having said that, of course, the Buddha acknowledges that there is inequality and works with that. This is a point that I made earlier, even in the first semester. But this is certainly a system that questions birth-based inequality at some level or another. This position did not become the dominant way of organizing society, and what we know today as the caste system, in which people are born into a certain caste and die in that caste, and religious rituals that are performed at death are also dependent on the caste to which someone belongs, right? So you are born into a caste, and even when you die, that caste identity does not leave you. We need to remember that this is the system as we have it now, although of course it's been challenged many times over the centuries. In traditional Brahmanical literature, there are two terms that are used for the system of stratification, and these two terms are Varna and Jati. Varna refers to the four great divisions of society, that are Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and a fifth. The fifth category, the term that's used is Panchama. Panchama, Panchama. And this is therefore a system of 4 plus 1. This is a status order system, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra plus 1. This is a status order system. There are, on the other hand, innumerable jatis. And jatis are endogamous units within which one must marry. So Varnas are also theoretically endogamous, but people do marry outside Varna. People actually also marry outside jati, but the endogamy is much more closely practiced when it comes to jatis. Members of a jati are traditionally assigned to a specific occupation. Each jati also has its own cultural traditions, its own food habits, rituals, dress codes. So it might seem that we are looking at a whole range of jatis that are just different from each other, right? So how do you understand caste? These are just groups that are different from each other, with different food habits, different ways of dressing, different rituals. But what is important here is that these occupations and specific cultural traditions function within a broader framework of hierarchy. Okay, this is an important point to make, because sometimes we believe and are told that the Varna Jati system is just a benign system of difference and a division of labor. But that hierarchy, of course, is a very important aspect of the Varna Jati system. It is Jati now that provides the framework for understanding local hierarchies within regions. So the 4 Varna scheme is not what you find all over the subcontinent. In the Tamil South, for example, you don't have Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, but you have much more local forms of hierarchy. So the division of Shudras into pure Shudras and impure Shudras, but maybe a missing Kshatriya Varna. So this is the system as you find it in the Brahmanical texts, very, very broadly. And this is the kind of material that we are looking at. This is of course not the only way of looking at the Varna Jati system. And this is where Ambedkar's work comes in handy in thinking about caste differences. In Ambedkar's distinctive formulation, caste is a system of graded inequality in which castes are arranged according to an ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt. That is, as you go up the caste system, the power and status of caste groups increases, and as you go down the scale, the degree of contempt for the caste increases, and the lower castes have no power, have no status, and are regarded as dirty and polluted. So this is a framework based on experience. And of course, Ambedkar knew the text as well, and that would be clear if you look at his work on Hinduism, on Dharmashastra, and there is a substantial amount of that. So someone who's experienced the force of cultural oppression sees his framework as the framework of experience. So there's what the texts tell us, the Dharmashastra texts tell us, which is from the point of view of upper caste men, mostly Brahmin men, and then there's the view from the bottom up. So one is a view from the top down, the other is a view from the bottom up. And interestingly, some of the early work on caste, contrary to what Upinder Singh says, was done by the left historians. So R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, Vivekananda Jha, who's worked on untouchability. These are all historians aligned with the left, with the Indian History Congress. But what is also very important to note is that these are all Brahmin men. Okay, so the perspective, of course, would be different. The point that the recent work on Ambedkar, there's a publishing house that's dedicated to issues of caste, also run by an upper caste man who pretends that caste identity does not matter for him. I don't know whether it does. This is a man called S. Anand, and it's a publishing house called Navayana. So he's republished a lot of Ambedkar's work with commentary and detailed introductions, and it engages with how the left has simply not adequately engaged with Ambedkar's work and the work of Dalit intellectuals. Okay, so there's a problem in the way in which we do ancient India. Uma Chakravarti, on the other hand, draws consistently and very heavily on Ambedkar. In Ambedkar's formulation, cultural oppression as it operates in the lives of the low castes and women, and especially women of disprivileged castes, is far more dehumanizing than economic exploitation. So basically he's saying that there is class, but caste is a more pernicious form of social inequality. Caste ideology also denies a sense of self to low caste communities by depriving them of dignity and personhood. And an important aspect of the caste system, that's the Varna Jati system, is that those people who have dominated the means of production have also tried to dominate the production of knowledge to legitimize the inequality of the caste system. So it is those who are dominant in the system who decide, for example, what merit is. Okay, so just quick exercise for you to think about this. This is the exercise that I have no cardboard box with me. So imagine I put a cardboard box here and I ask everybody to scrunch up a sheet of paper and make it into a paper ball. And I ask you all to chuck that paper ball into that cardboard box. Divyansh, Sparsh, Priyanshu, Parav, and Reet will be able to get to that box more easily than Shubham and Teja and Joanne and Srishti. So where you are in the caste hierarchy, in short, then determines how quickly you get to your goal, which is the cardboard box. So think about that. So when we are talking about merit, are we looking at an equal level playing field? So think about this. So an important, and then it is always upper caste people, those who have access to privilege and education, who say, hi, what's happening to this world? There's no place for merit any longer, right? So an important part of the caste system is those who dominated the means of production have also tried to dominate the production of knowledge to legitimize inequality, and the hegemony that they enjoy allows them to control the very standards by which their rule is understood, so that the perspective of the lower castes has no place in it. But of course, those at the bottom end have not always accepted their position, and they have found ways to interpret their own identities differently from the way that the upper castes have constructed them. And this is of course not so easily evident in the Dharma Shastra type material that we are reading for reconstructing ancient Indian history, but we know this today from struggles over resources which exist alongside struggles over socially constructed meanings, definitions, terminologies and identities. So the words that you use to describe yourself, Dalit rather than untouchable, for example. So it's clear, and many people have said this, that caste and class in India overlap. But it might also be useful to clarify our understanding of caste as a specific and unique kind of stratification that is distinct from class. Obviously not unrelated to it, but also distinct from class. The caste system, there's some buzzing going on at the back of the class. Please keep quiet, whoever that is. So the caste system comprises a series of hereditary groups. So remember, you're born into a caste. You're also born into Hinduism. Of course, now there's the ISKCON movement and you can become a Hindu. But in general, you were born. And now, of course, there's Ghar Vapsi. So you can always be, again, made a Hindu. Traditionally, you had to be born into Hinduism and you were born into a caste. So we are looking at a system of hereditary groups characterized by hierarchy, not just difference, but also hierarchy, or gradations according to ritual status. Who can perform this ritual? Who can go into a temple? Who is debarred from performing certain kinds of sacrifices? Who cannot go into a temple? The basis of inequality underlying the Varna Jati system is the application of evaluative, value-based standards in placing particular groups as high or low. These standards are rooted in the Dharma Shastra, the religious, social, legal texts of the Brahmanical system. As the Varna Jati system developed, the high and low were opposed to each other because of their supposed associations with notions of pure and impure. Yeah, so when you are thinking about, just a random thought, when you are thinking about untouchability and how terminology and ways of thinking about what are called untouchable groups change over time, think in terms of 3 films, okay? The 3 films would be, I don't know how, you can certainly see them, 2 of them on YouTube. One is an old Ashok Kumar Devika Rani film called Achut Kanya. The second is Bimal Roy's Sujata, which has Sunil Dutt and Nutan. And the third is any of Nagaraj Manjule's films. So one of them, of course, became a huge blockbuster in Marathi. This is a film called Sairat, remade into Hindi by the Karan Johar banner with Janhvi Kapoor and I forget the fellow's name. And his other films. Oh yes. I have seen that. So I don't think I saw it through, but I've seen Sairat, which is actually far more powerful because the girl is also killed in the film, right? So here Janhvi Kapoor is the upper caste girl and she is not killed, only the husband is killed. So, it becomes a different kind of film. Have you seen any of these films? Okay, anyway. So in Sujata, of course, there's also the question of blood. Okay, so Sujata literally means well born. She's a Dalit girl who's brought up in a Brahmin household. Remember, this is the 1950s, and this is the time when people of all kinds, academics, filmmakers, theatre people, artists, are participating in the project of nation building. Nation building means something different in the 1950s from what it means now. And so there's a kind of attempt to include large numbers of people in different groups of people. So Sujata is this Dalit girl whose parents die in, I think, a famine, and she's adopted by a Brahmin family, really by the man in the Brahmin family. The woman, the wife, is not very happy about her being incorporated into this family. So, really the idea is nation as family, family as nation. So what happens in this household really is reflective of what's going on in the larger nation. Anyway, she's not educated like the girl of the family, the Brahmin girl, but the hero of the film, which is Sunil, that falls in love with her, and then of course there's a lot of tension in the film. Anyway, the tension is resolved because the adopted mother has an accident and she needs blood, and only Sujata's blood matches hers, right? So then this, of course, overturns all ideas about purity of blood, and her life is saved. So, so you contrast that and the idea of purity of blood and purity of work with the kind of films that are being made now on what is called the caste question. And Nagaraj Manjule's films are entirely different. They are also made by someone who belongs to the Dalit community, and that of course is exactly the point, right? So it struggles over resources as well as struggles over terminologies and ways of understanding groups that come at the bottom of the hierarchy. So anyway, the point here, to get back to Dharma Shastra and so on, is that as the Varna Jati system developed, the high and low were opposed to each other because of their supposed associations with the notions of pure and impure. For example, in terms of the purity of blood and the nature of work. Thus, while some Varnas and Jatis could participate in rituals, others were forced to do menial work. This accounts for the elaborate rules that govern contact to ensure the separation between high and low. Public spaces were divided in such a way that access to streets was barred to lower castes because they were regarded as defiling. Thus, in ideological terms, great danger was perceived to emanate from the mixing together of things that needed to be kept separate to avoid impurity. Each caste is regarded as a closed and bounded group in the Dharma Shastra, and all social relations are governed by rules within each group. Eating, physical contact, and marriage, so meals and marriage, remember, are highly ritualized and strictly confined to other members of each bounded group. This is not just something that we find in Dharma Shastra. People from outside the subcontinent also noted this. And the Chinese pilgrim Fa Xian, who was inclined to make India seem like an ideal land because this was the land of the Buddha, also was struck by the practice of untouchability. This is the 5th century CE. So he mentioned it in his account of his travels in India. He observed that those who were regarded as untouchables were forced to live outside the boundaries of towns and marketplaces. And on approaching such places, they struck a piece of wood to let others know that they were coming, so that those who regarded themselves as pure could avoid their touch. So obviously class and caste are different, but they also overlap. And all Dalit scholarship has pointed out that caste is not just a system of status, it also has a material base. It's not only a form, but also has concrete material content. It has historically shaped the basis of Indian society and continues to have crucial economic implications even today. So what you have then is two hierarchies, one according to ritual purity and the other which is a political and economic hierarchy, and these together make for the unique form of inequality that the Varna Jati system represents. So you have in the Varna Jati system the need to keep those that are pure separate from those who are impure. And this means that each caste is a bounded group. It needs also to be reproduced as a bounded group. Endogamous marriages have been the primary means by which this separation between pure and impure has been maintained, and there is therefore a crucial relationship between caste and gender. This relationship is really crucial in the perpetuation of the Varna Jati system, and we need to look at the structure of marriage for this. In marriage, or the exchange of women, all feminist scholarship tells us, women are a resource in the hands of the group that they are a part of. The exchange of women is a shorthand for expressing that the social relations of a kinship system specify that men have certain rights in female kin, and that women do not have the same rights in their male kin. It is a system in which women do not have full rights to themselves. And I'll talk about this more when I talk about the forms of marriage. The best form of marriage, particularly for Brahmin women, is what is called the Brahma form of marriage. And the father hands over his virgin daughter to her husband, accompanied by gifts and ornaments and so on. And the girl has remarkably little say in this, right? So the point is that men have rights in female kin that women do not have in male kin. Indeed, women do not have full rights to themselves. Among the rules that social groups have created for the exchange of women, ritualized as marriage, have been exogamy, that is the rule prohibiting marriage within a specified group, and endogamy, the rule enjoining marriage within a specified group. So that is, you cannot marry someone who's too closely related to you, but you have to marry within a certain social group. So endogamy, exogamy is found in most societies, but endogamy, that bounds off a group from others to maintain separation, is a less universal phenomenon and is a necessary feature of a society stratified on the basis of birth, because different strata would not be able to maintain their distinctive identities without endogamy. How do you maintain endogamy? You maintain endogamy through a system of arranged marriages. So women cannot just be let loose to have relationships with whoever they want. Arranging marriages is a way of ensuring that endogamy functions in a controlled way and limits the possibility of marriage outside. So endogamy also means that you can never have self-sufficient village communities, because the people in the village are either not suitable or they are too closely related to you to be able to marry them. Therefore, the premise of endogamy means that women are always married outside their villages, and this whole idea of self-sufficient village communities, which people talk about, especially for the early medieval period, is something that can never be the case. By that time, the Varna Jati system has actually crystallized. Since the central function of marriage in the Dharma Shastra is to procreate, it's not companionship, which is one of the themes that's taken up in the Vedic corpus. So men and women can get married for companionship. By the time that you're coming to the Dharma Shastra, men and women can only get married to procreate. The children born of marriage are essential in maintaining and reproducing the social order. There's a lot of emphasis on marriage, and people are not encouraged to not get married. I don't know whether I've recounted this story, which I clearly had to the BA program class, of a man called Jaratkaru in the Mahabharata who doesn't want to get married. Had I? Okay, anyway, so this is one of the stories in the Adi Parva of the Mahabharata, and it takes the story forward, that's why it's there. But it's very often held up as an example of narcissism in the Brahmanical scheme of things. So there is this guy called Jaratkaru who's only interested in his own asceticism. and becoming a really pahcha hua ascetic. And he's carrying on like that, and he's getting on in years. And one day on his wanderings, he comes to a cave where he finds his ancestors hanging upside down from ropes which are being gnawed at by rats. So he asks his ancestors, why are you in this terrible state? And his ancestors tell him that's because our descendant Jaratkaru hasn't got married and produced a child. Remember, there are these debts that people are supposed to discharge, the three rina, and those debts include the debt to the ancestors. So you have to produce children, male children obviously, to discharge those debts. And Jaratkaru hasn't been doing that because he hasn't got married and he hasn't produced a son. So Jaratkaru is not in the least bit interested in getting married, but he realizes that his ancestors are in a bad way. So he creates a condition. He says, I will marry a woman who has the same name as me. Remember, this is the Mahabharata. So of course there is a woman called Jaratkaru, and she is, of course, though not a fully human person, she is a snake woman, the sister of the snake king Vasuki. So he marries her and she conceives. So he's done his duty by his ancestors. He tells her, now there is a child in you. So the term that's used in the Sanskrit text is asti, there is. And he leaves her and he carries on with his asceticism. Now this child therefore has an important name and an important function. So the term that's used is asti. There is. And that's of course related to the term astika, someone who believes in the authority of the Veda, and this is the kind of person who's contrasted with the nastika, someone who questions the authority of the Veda. So obviously Astika, that's his name, this is the lower case, is Astika, one who believes in the authority of the Veda, and he's Astika, so that's a proper name with a capital A, and you write it in Roman letters. So he has a role to play, obviously. And in the Mahabharata, nothing is done in half measures, you know that, right? So Parashuram kills all the Kshatriyas of the earth again and again and again. Janamejaya, the descendant of the Pandavas, discovers one fine day that his father died of snake bite. And then he wants to kill all the world's snakes. So he conducts a snake sacrifice to kill all the world's snakes. And the snakes beseech their descendant, Astika, who is half Brahmin and half snake, and they ask him to save them. And then Astika lands up at the snake sacrifice, Sarpasatra as it's called, and he stops the snake sacrifice. The snake sacrifice, as it happens, is not a desirable kind of sacrifice to be performing. It's a rite of black magic. It's what is called abhichara. So there's good discussion of black magic also in the Mahabharata. And he stops this rite of black magic, and then Janamejaya says, okay, fine, I'll stop this rite, but you must come back to later sacrifices when I perform what are considered alright sacrifices. So he invites him to his Vajimedha, or the horse sacrifice. So Vajimedha, Ashwamedha are horse sacrifices. So anyway, in short, it is necessary to produce children, right? So the purpose of marriage, to come back to what I was saying, is to produce children, preferably male children. And this, of course, is essential for the maintenance and reproduction of the social order. Both the hierarchical relations of caste and the perpetuation of the male line rest on marriage practices. Marriages link vanshas, that is lines, and maintain the internal purity of castes in the larger system of caste hierarchy. Therefore, you cannot marry just anybody you want, right? You have to marry the right kind of person, from the right kind of family, the right kind of varna or jati. And this is something that Uma Chakravarti tells us that is not only emphasized in Dharma Shastra but also in narrative literature. And she draws our attention, I mean, it's there in lots of narrative literature, but for whatever reason, she draws our attention to the Kamba Ramayana, the Tamil medieval Tamil Ramayana, that also upholds endogamy. So Ram declined Shurpanakha's proposal of marriage to him by first using the argument that as a Brahman woman, she cannot marry a Kshatriya man. So remember that Ravan and his family is very substantially Brahmin. They only have a little bit of Rakshasa blood in them. Otherwise, they are Brahmins and they conduct Vedic rituals and so on. So she is a Brahman woman, therefore she cannot marry a Kshatriya man, and that would be a Pratiloma marriage. That is not the right kind of marriage because she is of a higher varna than he is. So it's desirable to contract endogamous marriages, but if you don't, it's alright if a man marries a woman who's of a lower varna, but absolutely not alright if the woman is of a higher varna and marries a man of a lower varna. So remember, even in our own times, it's alright for women to marry up, very bad to marry down. This works at many different levels. It functions in an obvious way at an economic level. When we are told how will she adjust, she comes from a much wealthier family than the man that she is married. Right? So there's that, which is the economic dimension, but there is of course the caste dimension, and there's a whole category that emerges from these intervarna unions. These are anuloma or pratiloma. Anuloma is when the man is of a higher varna and the woman is of a lower varna, not desirable, not ideal, but better than pratiloma, which completely turns the social hierarchy upside down. I'll come back to this again. So what you have then is a combination of social status, economic production, and social reproduction, and these were dependent on what has been called by Uma Chakravarti and others Brahmanical patriarchy. To understand the significance of Brahmanical patriarchy, we need to recognize that it is not just a routine variant within the framework of the subordination of women, which is patriarchy, but is a structure unique to Brahmanical Hinduism and the caste order. So what is it that makes it unique, right? So while of course we live in a patriarchal society, but invoking patriarchy when you're looking at questions of gender should not be the only answer that I get. Now it's a good word to know, but things are always much more nuanced. So, when we are told, what do you expect after all this is patriarchy, that's not a good enough explanation. One needs to look beyond that. Anyway, so Brahmanical patriarchy, and I'm using Uma Chakravarti's work. It is a set of rules and institutions in which caste and gender are linked, each shaping the other, and this is a system in which women are crucial in maintaining the boundaries between castes. Patriarchal codes in this structure ensure that the caste system can be reproduced without violating the hierarchical order of closed endogamous circles. Further, Brahmanical codes for women differ according to the status of the caste group in the hierarchy of castes, and the most stringent rules on sexuality are reserved for women of the highest classes. So in short, Brahmin women have the most restrictions placed on them. Finally, Brahmanical patriarchy also incorporates an ideology of chaste wives and pativrata women who are valorized, and a structure of rules and institutions by which caste hierarchy and gender inequality are maintained through both the production of consent and the application of coercion. So let me explain both of these aspects. So when women are brought up in India, in all our families, we are told about the right way to be, right? So women who are faithful to their husbands are always valorized, whereas those who are not. So this is the ideology of chaste wives. Pativrata women, pativrata is a woman whose vow is to her husband. I'll talk more about the vrata as an institution later when I talk about Puranic Hinduism. So these are women who are devoted to their husbands, women such as Sita and Savitri, and routinely vows are kept in their name, right? So vows are kept for the long life of husband, etc., etc. So women are constantly brought up with these rituals, with, encouraging these ways of being. So these are the kinds of women who are valorized. In the Dharma Shastra, we are routinely told that women are inherently fickle and they are predisposed to violating rules. A powerful ideological mechanism is therefore required so that women can control themselves. This is what we call indoctrination, and this is the ideology of Pativrata Dharma or Stri Dharma. So Uma Chakravarti tells us that Pativrata Dharma converts potentially disobedient women into pliant women. So women may be inclined to lead their own lives, but if you're brought up every day on a constant diet of what is the right way to behave, then you are over time converted into a pliant woman, and women's sexuality is brought under control by their own self-regulation. At the same time, Brahmanical texts tell us that women are inherently fickle, and they prescribe rules to be enforced by the ruler and by those who act on behalf of the king. So for example, the mother-in-law, but most often the male head of the family, and if all else fails, then the ruler. So in many of the commentaries of the Ramayana, we are told that Shurpanakha is not only trying to violate the Varna order by trying to contract a union that is not an endogamous union, but she's a deviant woman and therefore needs to be disfigured and disciplined. So that too is part of Rajadharma. Ram is not ruling the realm, but he's the ruler in exile, right? He's the ruler to be in exile, and he is performing his Rajadharma in disfiguring Shurpanakha. So the point is, disobedient women need to be disciplined. This disciplining is done through an ideology of chaste wives and pativrata women who are valorized, and a structure of rules and institutions through which the status quo is maintained through both the production of consent and the application of coercion. This set of norms has shaped the ideology of the upper castes in particular, and what is significant is that when disprivileged castes attempt what is called Sanskritization, upward social mobility, we find them emulating the norms of the upper castes. So we find, for example, that upper caste practices of enforced widowhood for women are imposed by the lower castes that claim a higher status for themselves, and practices such as vegetarianism and so on, which people talk about routinely. So what you have then is an order, which is an order of statuses, of occupations and services, and a lot of this hinges on marriage and marriage practices. It is not surprising, therefore, that marriage receives a great deal of attention in Dharma Shastra literature, in, say, texts such as the Manusmriti. Marriage is the focal point of the obligations through which the householder reproduces the social order, the family, the lineage, the property system, and the Brahmanical status order. The householder is thus obliged to marry and have sons. This in turn requires that women must be brought in as wives from other families, and the Manusmriti dwells in some detail on the care that must be shown in selecting wives. They must not only be from the same Varna, but also from respectable families, though not related, and there's a whole lot of rules and regulations that come into play. We find in the Brahmanical text that there's also an obsession with hierarchization and classification, and this is expressed in different forms of marriage. So you've done this in school, so I'll just read out the forms of marriage rather than going into what each one of them is. The forms of marriage are Brahma, Daiva, Arsha, Prajapatya, Asura, Gandharva, Rakshasa, and Parishacha. So there are 8 forms of marriage, and obviously there's a hierarchy, with some being better forms of marriage than others. The Brahma, for example, is seen as the ideal form of marriage for Brahmin girls. In some cases, the possibility of mutual love may be acknowledged, as for example in the Gandharva. So that's the form of marriage that Shakuntala, for example, contracts, comes to a sad end though, remember. And there are other forms that's envisaged for Kshatriyas. And then of course there's a Rakshasa form of marriage, which is not about Rakshasas as demons, but it's a form of marriage which involves abduction. So Ravan's abduction of Sita is not the Rakshasa form of marriage. He is just a Rakshasa, he abducts a married woman. The Rakshasa form of marriage is when a man abducts a woman against the wishes of her family, and an example would be something like the Arjun-Subhadra marriage, right? So he abducts her, he falls in love with her. We are told by the text that she also falls in love with him. But Krishna tells Arjun, you can never trust women. You don't know when they'll change their mind, just abduct her. But the rest of her family is, this is by the way taken from the Mahabharata, I'm not cooking this up. And it's regarded as one of the legitimate forms of marriage for Kshatriya men who cannot accept things that are given to them, right? There's a whole rationale behind it. Hence, the acceptability of the Rakshasa form of marriage. It's fine to just take away by force what is not being given to you. The example, of course, is that of the Arjun-Subhadra marriage, and of course there's a battle with Subhadra's extended family, and of course Arjun emerges victorious, and then she joins the Pandava household, where where Draupadi is not very happy, and so there are the sort of dynamics of the royal household and how she makes herself acceptable. And interestingly, it's the child of Rakshasa marriages that takes forward the Kuru lineage. In this case, all of Draupadi's sons die, whereas Arjun and Subhadra's son is Abhimanyu, and it is his son who carries forward the Kuru line. So that's also an interesting point. Anyway, so to come back to the forms of marriage, the higher forms of marriage are associated with gifts that accompany the handing over of the bride. I have heard the bell. By her father to the groom. And the best form of marriage is regarded as the Brahma right for Brahmanas. And here the father gifts his virgin daughter, appropriately accompanied by clothes and ornaments, to the husband. In short, he is ritually handing over the daughter and her sexuality to the husband, and his consent to the performance of the marriage is enough.